Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Matt Kelly for another episode of the award-winning Compliance Into the Weeds. Welcome back, Matt.
Hello, Tom. Good to be here.
We try to stay current and up to date, but we're going to rip this one from the headlines. So it started Friday and it's still going. H-1B visas. Where do you want to take it, Matt?
So I should begin by saying to everybody listening, we understand that H-1B visas are probably not a core compliance worry for most compliance officers, although I suspect all compliance officers at least are peripherally aware of H-1Bs, and some of you probably do worry about H-1B visas much more. However, I thought that what the Trump administration has done or is still trying to do with reform of the H-1B process, that is a mess, as you might have seen on the headlines over the weekends, and it was really emblematic of how this administration is approaching corporate regulation, which is generally not good, very confusing, very arbitrary, and it makes your life harder. So for all compliance officers who are wondering, how did we get here, that the great deregulator back in January, who said he was going to deregulate this, that, and the other thing, how come our lives seem to be getting more chaotic and more uncertain and more maddening? What he did with H-1Bs is really a fascinating example of the whole messy process. And if you are in HR or immigration law or something like that, you have a lot at stake here too. But even for anybody else generally, you want to understand how this administration is approaching regulation and how bonkers and slapdash it is. What we saw with H-1Bs is like perfectly on point to capture the mood.
So what were some of the slapdashedness, or is it just us interpreting it incorrectly?
Oh, I think it's, first off, I think it's slapdashery. I'm not sure. But here is what happened. Now, for those who do not know, H-1B visas are the visas that the United States issues to highly skilled workers overseas who want to come to the United States. Their employer will bring them over under an H-1B because their employer can't find a suitably high-skilled American worker. Most often these go to technology employees. Most often they go to technology people from India, which is by far and away the biggest recipient of H-1Bs. But they also are for doctors, they are for academics in higher education, but a lot of it is software and technology engineers, telecommunications, medical device advances, things like that. And there are a lot of people in that category who want to come to the United States, far more than we could normally accommodate. So the current regime had been that visas were awarded by lottery, 85,000 H-1Bs issued every year. You were selected by lottery because like a zillion people apply for these every year. And you had to pay a $215 application fee for the lottery. If you then won the H-1B lottery, you also then had to pay another $5,000 or so for the actual application to get the visa, plus some personal legal fees. So it was all total several thousands of dollars, not more than $10,000 to get an H-1B if you hit the lottery. Along comes Donald Trump on Friday night, and he says that we are now going to have a $100,000 per visa application fee. So instead of the $215, it is now going to be $100,000 that typically the corporation sponsoring the employee would have to pay. They said on Friday night that this would be every year. And they said on Friday night that this will go into effect on Sunday, which is yesterday from when Tom and I are recording. What they didn't say and did not make clear Friday night is whether this would apply to existing visa holders. So if you're an H-1B visa person, you might have come into the United States, you're working at Google or Amazon or something like that. You went to Canada to visit your cousin, you went back home to India to visit your mom. Suddenly on Friday night, they say that if you are not here by Sunday, these new rules go into effect, you're going to have to pay $100,000. That was the interpretation. Everybody panicked. Corporate America panicked, started telling everybody with visa, H-1B visas around the world, if you are on our workforce, you have the visa, wherever you are, get to the United States like right now. And if you are somewhere overseas, getting back to the United States with 24 hours notice is going to be expensive. Lots of interesting videos and social media about the panic of people trying to get off flights or get onto flights or what this, that, and the other thing. Total mess. And then on Sunday, the Trump administration clarified this will not apply to existing visa holders. The $100,000 fee will only apply to new visa recipients who I guess still have to go through the lottery process, but that won't even start until next February. And it is a one-time fee, not an annual fee. Now, I want to be clear that when they announced it on Friday night, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said, and you can watch the video, I have, he said 5 separate times while standing directly next to the president, this would be an annual fee. Nobody said that this is current visa holders are exempt. They just issued the rule, that the proclamation that said this will go into effect on Sunday night, and total chaos. They corrected that by Sunday. But nonetheless, this is going to be a huge new tax on corporations. They expect that this is going to cost corporate America about $14 billion, according to the Financial Times. Massive chaos. And Tom, we can get into whether or not this is actually going to work to achieve the aims of preserving U.S. jobs. But that's why this was all in the headlines, because if you are in corporate HR or corporate legal, or you are a technology executive, or you're an H-1B visa holder, you were breathing out of a paper bag for like at least a good 12 or 24 hours from Friday into Saturday, trying to figure out which end was up.
So let's just go into not how will this work, but actually, I guess we do need, because you pointed out, first of all, you blogged about this today, so we'll link to that in the show notes. But you pointed out we've had multiple interpretations, including Friday, including Saturday, including Sunday. We've had no written guidelines. And as we all know, that they're all subject to the president's interpretation and his oral declinations of what this may or may not mean. So first of all, how do we ever get a clear guideline that you can depend on?
That ultimately is why I wrote about this, is because while, like I said, I understand most compliance officers don't deal with H-1B visa compliance all that much, the way this all came about is just emblematic of how the Trump administration approaches business regulation generally. I flagged 3 specific factors here that stuck in my mind. Number one, this pronouncement was arbitrary. Like, it came out of nowhere. Trump had said before, while running for president, he wanted to reform the H-1B visa process. It is something that should be reformed. However, nobody particularly knew that we would be getting this reform at 5 p.m. on a Friday. Nobody knew that we would be getting this reform of a $100,000 application fee. There was no proposal out for public comment. There was no guidance to accompany the announcement so that HR teams would know what to do. This was just Trump twiddling his thumbs behind the Resolute desk while Howard Lutnick shut his mouth off, incorrectly, apparently, saying, we're going to do this and it's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. I'm like, wow, okay, I guess we're doing this now. So there was the arbitrariness of this. The second factor, Tom, that jumped out to me was like, this is not going to actually work to do the thing that Trump said he wanted to do. He wanted to reduce use of H-1Bs and specifically try to bolster American jobs. Now, I think by charging $100,000 per visa, he's probably going to reduce the number of H-1Bs. But there are many people now who are pointing out that this will probably not lead to new American jobs. The thinking in Trump world is that if you make these H-1Bs so expensive, companies will say, it is not worth my time to bring foreign employees over here. I should just train Americans on these difficult jobs and then pay the Americans the good salary. That's probably not what's going to happen. Probably the companies are going to look and say, this will cost me a fortune to bring the high-skilled workers here. I might as well send all of the high-skilled work over there, where they already are, where it is cheaper. So I could easily see that, if you are a business incubator in Vancouver or Toronto or Montreal, you're doing handsprings over this because all the H-1B visas are now going to wind up, that work will get relocated there. Or you might say, if you're Amazon, which is, I think, the single largest user of H-1Bs, they might just decide to expand their operations in India. Why bring people over here when you can just send some managers over there? Or why bother bringing anybody anywhere at all if it's going to be this expensive to train American workers or bring them over here? Let's just use automation and AI and not have the jobs at all. This is the sort of internally inconsistent, flawed logic that we see a lot with Trump these days. Is he'll come up with a pronouncement and anybody who understands it is going to look and say, that's not going to get us where we want to go. There are ways we maybe could have reformed H-1Bs. We could have had a staggered implementation process. You could have had some sort of forbearance of the fees if you didn't use it because look, some companies will bring foreign employees over. The Americans will train them on the jobs. They will then fly the foreign employees back. Those employees will do the jobs and the Americans then get laid off. That's an abuse. That happens. You could enforce against that. You could have a forbearance for companies that don't do it. There's a dozen different ways we could reform H-1Bs because we should reform H-1Bs, but this is not what Trump sees it as. This is a shakedown, and that's all it's going to be, which, Tom, brings me to my third point about this that makes it so emblematic of Trump 2.0. The vehicle for corruption is baked into the new policy because included in the proclamation is a waiver that the Secretary of Homeland Security can dispose of this fee based on requests from the company that are in the interests of national security. What does that mean? How tightly is that governed? Where are we going to make sure that we don't have abuses in this, where somebody is giving Donald Trump an investment in his next crypto venture, and then miraculously that company's executive, you know what, they don't have to pay the fee after all. There's nothing to ensure that the corruption that is possible with this waiver is actually going to be prevented. And given the fact that this president is a convicted fraudster, has welched on debts back and forth his entire career, is just known to be running multiple different private enterprises while he is running the administration and setting policy, like, we are kidding ourselves if we think that this will not be a process primed for corruption and then it will happen. So that's why I glommed onto this H-1B thing. Arbitrary policy changes that don't make any business sense and do have possibility for corruption baked right into the new reform. Those are the hallmarks of Trump 2.0. And we are going to see it over and over again. We've seen it before. If you really want to understand why regulatory compliance and regulatory oversight in this administration is so bonkers, look at the H-1B thing that just happened, and that explains why. That explains, it just captures pitch perfect the bizarro place that we're in.
So, man, I think after listening to you that companies are going to decide, let's just use AI. Let's just get rid of the people everywhere. And certainly if it's going to cost us $100,000 per, whether it's training, whether it's flying people to India, whether it's flying people to another site. And the market's great at finding inefficiency and efficientizing it. Or perhaps an investment in Truth Social is in order.
That's all very possible. Like I said, this particular reform of H-1Bs does not make economic sense. What else would you expect from a president who has basically bankrupted every business he's ever tried? And it's just political fodder because there are a lot of people who have suffered at the misapplication of H-1Bs. There are companies that fly foreign workers in, they learn the American jobs, they fly home, and the American workers lose their jobs. I get that. I have talked to people who have suffered that. But this solution is not going to address that problem unless maybe it will make it worse. But, over and over, we are going to see these inconsistent approaches to policy, and compliance officers, HR teams, legal teams are going to be left wondering, what are we supposed to do here? Maybe if a different president were in charge, I'd be less worried about the ability for corruption to exist. I can't really think that George W. Bush ever would have built such a flawed corruption policy or loophole right into his policy. I don't think Barack Obama ever would have done it. But clearly, Donald Trump sees nothing really wrong with payoffs and things like that. We see favoritism wherever we go. We also see arbitrary policy announcements wherever we go, and we see policies that just don't make sense. This is just a nice encapsulation of all three at once. Compliance officers and legal teams, regulatory compliance people, need to start anticipating that this is the new normal for the Trump 2.0 administration. It's going to make your job difficult in a lot of ways. What is your workforce going to think about something like this? What about when your CEO says, do we really need to follow the policy, or couldn't I just make a donation to Trump's new political action committee or his crypto venture? I'll get some private time with him and then I'll make this go away. That's not an unreasonable statement for a conjecture for a CEO to make anymore. How are you supposed to have a corporate culture of compliance if your CEO says that? How are you supposed to have a corporate culture of compliance if your competitor engages in that sort of gross, reckless behavior? I don't think it's illegal per se, or maybe it isn't, but if they can get away with it and they do it, and your workforce is seeing your competitors do that, what is the message there? But even at a more practical level, what's the regulatory compliance response you're supposed to have? What if they drop some incoherent new policy on a Friday night and you have to start complying with it on a Saturday? What about moving your employees around the world in emergency circumstances, which is what some companies probably were worried about on Friday and Saturday night? We could go on and on. It is a sad statement, and I don't necessarily mean to turn this into just another diatribe about the approach of the Trump administration, but like I said, compliance officers who are wondering, why are things getting so chaotic and so risky and unforeseeable, unpredictable in corporate life? Well, it's stuff like this with the H-1Bs exactly shows us why.
Matt, can't wait to see what next week brings us.
Thanks, Tom.